Welcome, everybody. Thanks for attending. Hopefully today we can get through some facts for you and answer any questions you have that are out there. The agenda today, a couple of things we're going to go through is what is the Vermont Child Care Contribution, how to calculate your child care contribution, and then how to report and pay the child care contribution. So let's begin. The Vermont Child Care Contribution, was enacted in Act 76 of 2023. Wages subject to Vermont withholding are also subject to CCC. So this has raised a lot of questions. So if the answer to your question is the wages are subject to Vermont withholding, they are also subject to CCC. So we can get into questions later, but that's the gist of it. Collection will begin July 1st, 2024. I'm going to expand on this a little bit. What this means is that the first payroll paid after July 1st or after 2024 is subject to the CCC. So if your pay period ended on June 30th and you paid that out July 3rd, that first paycheck after July 1st would be subject to the CCC. And Vermont uses the federal definition of wages. It's the definition in 26 USC section 3401. And I do have a brief definition here. There are a lot of exceptions to this definition, so please understand that this is just a brief synopsis of it. So for the purposes of this chapter, the term wages means any remuneration other than fees paid to a public official for services performed by an employee for their employer, including the cash value of all remuneration, including benefits paid in any medium other than cash. So what is the child care contribution? The child care contribution is an employer tax on wages paid to employees who physically work in Vermont. So employers have to pay a 0.44% or 0.0044 payroll tax on employee wages paid in Vermont. Employers may withhold up to a quarter of that or 0.11% of the child care contribution from an employee's wages. So which wages count towards the child care contribution? It includes only wages paid for work physically performed in Vermont, a job site or an employee's home. This includes remote workers or people that are working physically in the state of Vermont. It excludes wages paid for work physically performed outside of Vermont. So I'll expand on these two a little bit. So a couple examples. You live in Brattleboro, you work at a hospital in Massachusetts. Massachusetts voluntarily withholds Vermont income tax for that employee. Those wages are not subject to the child care contribution. It's only for people that physically work in the state of Vermont. Your business could be in New Hampshire. You could have a Vermont employee working in St. Johnsbury from their home. Those wages would be subject to the CCC because the work is physically being performed in Vermont. So that is the big difference in this law, is that if you are physically in the state of Vermont doing the work, those wages are subject to CCC. If you work outside of the state, so I'm a St. Johnsbury employee, I work for a business in New Hampshire. I go to this business in New Hampshire every day. I work there. Everything's done in New Hampshire. Those wages would not be subject to the CCC. And then I did touch on this last slide too. Non-Vermont employers who withhold and pay Vermont income tax for employees as a courtesy are not required to pay the CCC on these wages. So again, that touches on the first example I had. You're an out-of-state employer. You have somebody working for you. You voluntarily withhold some taxes for that employee because they asked you to, and it's just a courtesy. Those wages are not subject to the CCC. So how to calculate your employer child care contributions. So in this example, the employer is paying the full 0.44% of the wages paid. So in this example, we have employee. Their quarterly gross wages are $20,000. And if we take the $20,000 and multiply it by the 0.0044, we get a total of $88 due for that employee for the quarter. Employers may deduct and withhold up to 0.11% of the CCC from employees' wages. So what this means is that you could withhold none. You could, as a company, you could choose to pay all of it for your employees, or you could withhold anywhere from 0.01 up to 0.11% of that from the employee's wages. The amounts of the employee's wages does not have to be the same for every employee. So this is in the law, it does not specify that you have to charge everybody the same amount. So as far as the Vermont law is concerned, you could charge some employees 0.11%, some 0, some 0.05%. I would be very cautious with not breaking any other discrimination laws or labor laws that might play into this. This example is strictly for this law for the child care contribution. It does not supersede any labor laws or discrimination laws that are out there. So please check with your tax professional before you decide to charge employees different amounts to make sure that you're above board. So here, how to calculate optional employee contributions. So in this case, the employer is still responsible for the 0.44% of the wages paid, but they choose to pass on 25% of that, or 0.11%, to the employees. So in this example, same employee has $20,000 in gross quarterly wages. The employer responsibility is the $88. Out of that $88, they chose to withhold 0.11% from the employee. In this case, that's $22. So the employer is paying $66, withholding $22 from the employee, but the employer is responsible for making sure that full $88 is paid. And then here's one more example. This is an employee that had 0.05% withheld. So again, these are different amounts that you can withhold from employees, anywhere from 0 up to the 0.11. So in this example, here's another employee. Again, they make $20,000 in gross quarterly wages. The employer contribution for the CCC is $88 due. They withheld 0.0005 from the employee's wages. That came to $10. So the employer portion to pay is $78. $10 withheld from the employee, which is still equals the full responsibility of the employer for $88. So how to pay the child care contribution. You may pay for the CCC in the same manner and frequency you pay the withholding tax now. Separate payments are not required, but they are certainly okay to do. We had this question come up a lot in our first webinar. If it's easier for your bookkeeping to make one payment for the withholding tax withheld and one payment for the child care contribution withheld, that is perfectly okay, as long as you're making them in the same manner and frequency that you do for the withholding tax. We don't care how many payments there are. You can have as many as you like. The first due date for this will be October 25th, 2024, and that is for the period of July 1st through September 30th, 2024. The second period will be due January 27th, 2025, and that's covering the October to December. The CCC will be reported on your quarterly form WHT 436. That's the Quarterly Withholding Reconciliation and Required Contributions, a new Part 3. So we moved the healthcare contributions to Part 4, and now Part 3 will be the child care contributions. After July 1st, 2024, the CCC must be paid according to the employer's established withholding schedule. So please keep making payments in the same manner. You may just include them, the CCC payments, in with your regular withholding payments. If CCC is withheld, you can report this in box 14 of the employee's W-2. I will expand on this just a little bit. There's been a lot of questions as how to code this on the W-2s. So for the bulk upload audience, our instructions are just about done. We're finalizing them this week, and they'll be released hopefully by the end of the week. It'll have clear definitions of where to put wages, or excuse me, CCC withheld on the W-2 for the bulk uploads. The manual entries, we have a spot in the manual entry where you'll see it says VTCCC. That is where you'll be able to input the amount withheld from an employee. And we're also encouraging people that create W-2s outside of our system, if they want a code to use for the reporting of the child care contribution, they could use VTCCC and then the amount withheld from the employee. And that's kind of a universal code that some preparers have decided to use. And right here is a little snippet of the instructions and the paper form. So as you can see, here are all the new fields. Part 3, number 6. Here's a checkbox to certify that no child care contribution is due based on the rules governing this reporting. So like I said, if you're excluded from paying the CCC, which means you're voluntarily reporting withholding wages for an employee, you could check this box to indicate that you don't owe any child care contribution. If you do owe child care contribution, we have a spot here on line 7 for the total wages subject to the child care contribution. This could match line 1. It could not, depending on where your employees work and the rules around the withholding of the child care contribution. But you will input the wages subject to the CCC on line 7. You will multiply them by the 0.44%, because this is the full responsibility of the employer to pay. And then we have an optional, well, not an optional, we have an info only line on line 9. We would like to know the amount of the child care contribution from line 8 that was contributed by the employees. So this is an info only, but this does help the legislature and the economists, see how this is working and see how much money is being passed through to the Vermont employees. That is the end of the slideshow. So we have some great tools here for you on our website. So first thing you see here is our tax.business@vermont.gov. This is our email address. If you have any questions about this, you feel free to email them. They're all very knowledgeable. They'll get back to you. Our phone number is 802-828-2551. You can call with any questions you have. And then below this are 2 websites. One of them is our website, the tax.vermont.gov/childcare contribution. This website has all the up-to-date information that we have on tax applications for the child care contribution, including FAQs, guidance. Most of the instructions I've given you in this webinar are also listed in this document we have on here. And then we also have the DCF.Vermont website. This website has a little bit more as to what the funds will be used for and where they'll go and how the state's going to use them.